My name's Ray Peachy. I am the Substance Abuse Prevention Coordinator for the town of Westford. I work with the Health Department. I have Gail Johnson right here next to me, almost next to me, and who's our town nurse, and Maria Lucci, who's our substance use disorder counselor. And she's working under a grant from the Greater Lowell Community Foundation. So we appreciate that. We do a lot of our stuff now is under grants. So it's very helpful to us. Now I'm going to do a few slides. Maria's going to do a few slides. And Gail, and then Maria, and then if anybody wants to do the hands-only CPR or learn or feel how to do it, it's a good thing to do. Just spend a couple of times. You're going to see a video, so that's going to be a good part as well. All right, I want to introduce Jeff Stevens, our boss. He's director of the Health Department. And we're ready to go. All right, what are opioids? And here's a list of them. A lot of them you know. Heroin, morphine, oxycodone. Then if you look down, there's hydrocodone, fentanyl. Fentanyl is becoming a real big thing for us. They're finding that 85% of the overdoses now are having fentanyl nearby or with the other things that the people have taken. So it's really becoming a hard thing. It comes in from a lot of times from China, most of the time, through Mexico and on up. What's an opiate do? The opiate tells the brain that there is no pain. That's the easiest way of doing it. It tells the brain that there's no pain where it is. What is addiction? All right. The first thing is addiction doesn't just have to do with drugs. Addiction can also have to do with, as we know, alcohol, smoking, all right? And if any of you smoke, you know how hard it is to get off of that. And if any of you drink too much, you know how hard it is to get off of that. So we do addiction as being all three. It's just an addiction. And now they've considered a mental disorder, addiction. It's finally been considered a mental disorder, not a physical one, plus a mental disorder. If you see the highlighted $38 billion, that's how much lost of federal tax money. Not just money, the money the federal government didn't get. Now you say that's a good thing, it's a bad thing, I don't know, but they lost $38 billion. Where do they get the tax money? From us, from businesses. Businesses are really hurting now from this stuff. And it's not an overdose anymore. It's a substance use disorder syndrome. That is what they're now calling it. They're giving it a nicer name, try and get the stigma away from a drug addict. Addiction. It's enslaved, the old Latin word of enslaved or bound to, which it definitely does. And we're going to go through, we're going to show you how it affects the brain, how it actually works. It's amazing when you see it. We're going to talk about Narcan and how that works, and pass these around when the time comes so you can look at them. Good to always have. You can get them at the pharmacies, but we'll talk about that. And the brain, it manifests in three distinct ways: carving for the object of addiction, loss of control over its use, and continuing involvement with it despite adverse consequences. Now these are some of the things that, if you don't know if you're addicted, that it would tell you, or give you a good idea that you may want to look at it even more often. Getting high and drunk on a regular basis, that doesn't mean you can't have a drink or two. I used to teach the DARE program many years ago to the 5th graders in town. And we talk about that. My father or my mother drinks. There's nothing wrong with having a drink here or there. All right, that's just the way society is. All right, it's when you do it too often, when you do a bunch of the things that they're doing right here and talking about. You avoid family and friends. You change friends, and that's one thing parents can look for. If somebody is changing friends, it's a good thing that, well, how come you don't have these friends? And actually, I don't like these friends that you're with. So it's a way of possibly making yourself think, you know. Just remember, you are the parent on this whole thing. Believing you need to use or drink to have fun. You don't, because if you drink too much, then you forget the fun you have. You know, I remember I had a friend one time, hey, you went to the baseball game last night? Yeah, how was it? I got so drunk I don't remember. It's like, well, why bother? You know, why bother? So it's just things that come along. Some more, pressing others to use the drink with you. All right, making other people drink. They say no, it means no, they don't want to. You don't have to say, oh, come on, have another one. Getting in trouble with the law, taking risks, missing work due to your intolerance for the addictive part, and feeling desperate or hopeless, having thoughts of self-harm. Now, when you get to that far, that complicates it, and there's more of that indication that it's a mental disorder as well, and they're really putting those together right now. It's a mental disorder as well as a substance use disorder.
We have some embedded videos to show you. I figured it explains it so much better sometimes. If you can just watch one of the videos, it really is quite good. So I'm going to have Ray set this up for us. I am the public health nurse in town. I work at the Westford Health Department. I also teach at Middlesex Community College for the nursing students, for the fundamental students, and I keep myself rather busy working, usually during the fall and winter months, working 6 days a week and doing a lot of education. So I like to teach and I like to educate the public in every way that I can. I also chair the committee for domestic violence, Westford Coalition for Nonviolence in this town as well. So we raise awareness for domestic violence and opioid addiction, domestic violence, alcoholism, and all sort of mental illness, all sort of run together. So we're going to, throughout the year, be doing programs. So keep an eye out for the different programs that we'll be running.
This is Susan. Susan loves to bike. While out for a ride, she falls and breaks her arm. Special cells called neurons send a signal through the spinal cord to the brain, which interprets the signal as pain. Susan understands the pain means she needs to go to the hospital, and her body is equipped for survival, helping her not to panic so she can seek help. Many of her neurons are covered in proteins called opioid receptors. These receptors act like a brake to slow down the neuron's ability to send pain signals. When injured, her body releases natural painkillers called endorphins. Like a key in a lock, endorphins activate opioid receptors, slowing down the pain signal and preventing a panic. Susan gets treated for the broken bone, but 3 months later, her arm still hurts. And now that pain is making her feel depressed and anxious. So her doctor prescribes an opioid painkiller. There are many different opioids, but they all share a chemical similarity to our own endorphins. This allows them to bind to the same opioid receptors and stop pain signals. But that's not all they do. Deep inside Susan's brain is a region called the ventral tegmental area, or VTA for short. The VTA is full of neurons that produce a chemical called dopamine. When something good happens, dopamine is released, giving Susan a feeling of pleasure. This helps teach her brain to keep seeking out good things. To keep dopamine neurons in check, inhibitory neurons keep the brakes on until something good comes along. Just like the pain neuron, these neurons are covered in opioid receptors. When Susan takes the painkiller prescribed by her doctor, the opioid receptors turn off the inhibitory neurons and release the brake on the dopamine neurons. The rush of dopamine temporarily eliminates Susan's depression and anxiety, and she feels relief, calmness, and even euphoria. As Susan continues to take the painkillers, her brain responds by trying to regain its balance. Her inhibitory neurons work extra hard, even when the opioid receptors are activated, and it becomes harder and harder for her dopamine neurons to release dopamine. Susan finds that she needs to increase her dose of painkillers in order to feel comfortable. This is called tolerance. Eventually, Susan's pills run out. Inhibitory neurons that had been working overtime are let loose, clamping down on those dopamine neurons and shutting them off almost completely. Now, not only is Susan in pain, but the depression and anxiety come back. On top of that, Susan feels ravaged by an inescapable physical sickness far worse than any flu. Susan's body is going through withdrawal. Most people who take opioids for a long time tend to experience some withdrawal, but they can still stop taking the pills and return to normal. But for people like Susan, it's not so easy. Her genetics and the environment she grew up in put her at a higher risk for addiction. Her withdrawal symptoms aren't just unpleasant, they're unbearable. Susan thinks the only way to feel normal is to find more opioids. And this is how the cycle of opioid addiction emerges, driven by a brain trying to regain its balance. But there is hope for Susan. Though the road to recovery can be challenging and there may be setbacks, treatment can retrain Susan's brain. With the help of medication and therapy, Susan finds pleasure in her life once again.
All right, a pleasure principle. So what goes on in your head once you have opioids on board? So the brain registers pleasure in many different ways. We think of it when you're having, a delicious snack or a delicious meal, or you got money, or you're having sex. One of those things stimulates the brain in the pleasure principle, and that's what your body craves good things. It remembers the good things that you do, so that's very important. Opioids provide a shortcut to the brain's reward system by flooding the brain with the neurotransmitter called dopamine, and it just floods your brain, and you're like, this is really wonderful, I like this, I'm going to keep doing it, and that's where the problem lies. The more you take in the oxycodons and the fentanyls and the Percocets and heroin and methamphetamines and all of these opioids, what's happening is your body continues to crave this. Also, all drugs of abuse, like nicotine to heroin, causes a powerful surge of dopamine in your body. And dopamine not only contributes to the pleasure, but it's also part of your learned memory. You start remembering that when you did the drugs, how good you felt by taking it. And your body remembers that. Just like when you had a really good meal at a restaurant, I remember eating at whatever restaurant. I remember I loved the food there. And you'll be more apt to rather go to that restaurant because you love the food. Same thing, it tricks your brain into thinking, wow, this really was great. And you're always seeking that same high that you had the first time you did one of the oxycodons or the fentanyls. You liked the way that felt. And being a nurse, I just want to say, there is nothing wrong with taking narcotics. If we are in pain, you've had surgery, it is okay when a doctor orders you a medication for the pain, because that's what it's for. It's geared to help you because you are in pain. The problem lies is when you become so dependent on that medication to make you feel good. Instead of taking it for like a week or 10 days or 2 weeks, what your brain is telling you, no, some people have that tendency. If you have a familial, so if you have a family history of drug abuse or alcoholism, there is a higher propensity for you to become also addicted to medication or alcoholism if it's in the family. So it's a draw. So, so as I was saying, like, it's not a problem if a doctor's ordering it or a dentist is ordering it if you just had a tooth extracted. But the problem is when you're continually using this medication for that relaxed and happy, wonderful feeling you're getting from the narcotics. Dopamine not only contributes it, but like I said, so it's good for the memory. And its condition helps explains why people have that draw, the addiction, and they remember that and they want to continue with that. They want to continue with the drugs because it felt good to take it. So this graph right here shows you a little bit about what dopamine does. So dopamine for a normal, the way we are normally, and you may not be able to see this, so I apologize, so I'll just get a little closer, but your normal is 100. That's this graph that they have. They do it in dopamine units. So 100 is normal. A great meal is like 150, right? So it was good. And when you're having sex brings it up to 200. Now we're talking about cocaine, 350. Then you're talking about prescription opioids, Percocets, oxycodones, OxyContin, that. 500, 900 for heroin, and then you go for the methamphetamines and it shoots all the way up to 1,300. So you can imagine if you're taking this medication and it really made you feel really wonderful when you took it, your brain remembers that felt so good and it shot up all those dopamine levels. The draw is, well, I want that again. That was awesome. And that's where the problem lies, right? Because then you seek it. You want to get more of the good, pleasurable feeling. So I'm going to show you a picture, and I'm going to read it. You actually, if you have it, that would be great, because I can read it to you, or you can look up while you're looking at the brain. As you can see here on the bottom, the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the region of that regulates the emotions. It's associated mainly with memory, long-term memory. So that's the hippocampus. The cerebral cortex plays a key role in memory, attention, perception, awareness, thought, language, and consciousness. The amygdala, down below, is responsible for the perception of emotions, anger, fear, sadness, and controlling aggression. It helps store memories of events and emotions that a person can recognize similar feelings in the future. So you remember what that all felt like, and that would be the amygdala. And lastly, over here is the nucleus accumbens, and that's a small part of the brain that helps with the motivation, pleasure, and addiction. It's the pleasure center of the brain. The cluster of neurons affects the neurotransmitter dopamine and the link to the brain pathways that cause addiction and depression. So the damage to this part of the brain can cause a lack of motivation and inhibits addictive behavior.
Before I talk, I'm Maria, by the way. Thanks for coming. Before I talk about Narcan and naloxone, I think it's important to just speak briefly about the progression of addiction, especially opiate addiction and overdose. So I assume everybody in this room has heard that there's an opiate epidemic, that it is, it's gotten to the point of national attention how often people are overdosing and unfortunately dying from overdose to this really terrible and devastating. So the disease is devastating. It's tearing apart families and lives, and people are losing loved ones at a just really rapid rate. So it's for good reason gotten a lot of attention. But I think it's important to understand that a person doesn't necessarily wake up one day and become addicted to fentanyl or heroin. And begin injecting an overdose. A lot of times, the progression of this disease starts much, much younger than that, and most, it's really common. My other job happens to be working in an addiction treatment center, and for years, hearing when people's first use of alcohol, marijuana, 12, 13 or younger sometimes, and by 15, 16 years old, we're regularly drinking, using marijuana, using a substance, and then, potentially using opiate pill form. So either borrowing prescriptions, buying prescriptions from people who had them, or taking them out of the medicine cabinet, getting a prescription, misusing it. And so it starts in this way that can be a little bit insidious. So I just think that's important to note, because there's so much stigma around addiction, and opiate addiction in particular, and IV drug use, that I don't think people, I think there's a misconception in general about how this can begin. And it can begin with marijuana use, alcohol use, pills, different kinds of mixing of pills. And then once it gets you, it gets you. And the grip is very, very strong. It is a brain disease. And so once a person is addicted on that physiological level, and they go into physical withdrawal symptoms when they're not using an opiate, then they're very, very sick. So imagine the worst flu you've ever had times 10, that kind of sick. So their drive is not, at the end stages or later stage of addiction, is not to get high anymore, it's to get normal. And so that's how this kind of disease progresses. And so it can take everything, it does take everything, and leads to homelessness, and leads to people losing contact with their families, stealing. All the behaviors that are associated and go along with addiction happen because of that desperation to get normal. So because of that, and because of when fentanyl, which is 50 times stronger than heroin, kind of entered into the scene, and it's so dangerous that a person can use a very small amount and overdose accidentally. So what happens when somebody overdoses from an opiate is basically everything shuts down and they stop breathing. So Narcan, naloxone has saved, a lot of lives at this point. And it's important, if you know somebody who has an opiate addiction, to have Narcan, get it either at your pharmacy or at, there's events where there are trainers that can actually distribute Narcan. Find where you can get it and have it, because it really can reverse an overdose and save a life. It cannot cause an overdose. It does not make people violent, which I think is a myth, really. What happens is it can cause withdrawal symptoms. And there's hypersensitivity of any kind of reaction is very, very rare. If you don't have an opiate on board, meaning if you see somebody, they're on the ground, they're blue, they're not breathing, you suspect it was an opiate overdose, but you don't know, Narcan can't hurt them. So if you give the person Narcan, it's not going to do, if there's no opiates in their system, it will do nothing. That's the worst that can happen. If I squirted up my nose right now, it would do nothing. So it's worth, if you have any friends, family, anybody who has an opiate addiction or uses opiates, it is good to have on hand. And it is available at pharmacies with standing orders at most CVS and Walgreens pharmacies.
What you just saw was a presentation that the Westford Health Department just put on opiates and Narcan, additionally with alcohol. My name's Jeff Stevens. I am the health director for the town, and sitting with me is Ray Peachy, who is the substance abuse prevention coordinator for the town of Westford as well. Ray, you put this show on the 24th of July at the NAB Country Club, which they were gracious enough to host for us, and it had to do with opiates and Narcan and the state of Westford.
Yes.
What do you care to share about that show?
Well, it was interesting to me, the people that showed up, talking to them afterwards anyway, they all really appreciated the show and the information that we gave them. But the idea of the whole thing, as we discussed prior to it, was to write that short grant so that we could get some money to put this on and inform the residents of, more or less what's going on in Westford in the relations to opioids and alcohol and Narcan, and how to do Narcan.
So I think one of the important things that we can get out of this presentation was that yes, there is actually something we need to pay attention to here in town, that it's not just in other towns. We've got an issue that we have to address in Westford, correct?
Yes, I believe so. And it is a person's perspective as to do we have a drug problem or not, okay? We are very low. There's no question about it. And we also are capable, most families are capable of knowing, finding out that their child has a drug problem and maybe sending them to a facility to take care of it before it gets to any of our statistics. So as of January, we've had 1 overdose in Westford, okay? What most people don't know and can't find is we've had 2 of our residents in Lowell that have overdosed.
Right, so they're leaving the town borders. And
correct, which happens all the time.
so do you think part of the reason why our numbers are fairly low is the amount of hard work you've done over the past several years to try to educate? Do you think that's assisted? I personally feel like it has a little bit.
Thank you. I think it is. I think we all, it's not just one thing, you know? I mean, the schools teach them. The schools brought in basic, Botfin life skills. And that was a good program, and then they're still doing it on drugs, self-esteem, smoking, et cetera. That's gonna be a big help. I myself, I really wanted to focus on education of adults as to what is going on. Most people, you know, they move into Westford and, you know, they don't see any problems. And there always is problems. There's no place that is problem-free. So we need to work together to get this problem, to keep it low. So we have 1 overdose and no deaths this year, which is fantastic. I believe back in 2016, we had 19 overdoses and 3 deaths.
Now, our numbers are lower than that now.
Yes, they are. 1 overdose and no deaths so far this year, you know.
You think part of that has to do with the administration of Narcan?
I definitely do too. And as we did in that program, we showed the people how, if they come upon somebody, to administer the Narcan if they have it, and how to do no-breath CPR to keep the person alive, even after they've injected the Narcan in the person's nostrils. To bring them out, they still need to keep that breathing going until they snap out of it. And it's not instantaneous, but it's very quick.
Right.
So, yeah, I just think we need to keep this going on. We need to work together. I mean, I'd like to thank the state for the collaborative that we belong to. It's called SAPC, and I just can't think of
And the MOPSI.
and MOPSI, yeah. Massachusetts Opioid, MOA, Abuse Prevention Collaborative, and SAPC is Substance Abuse Prevention Collaborative, and we got the funding from the SAPC program.
Yeah, and I think it was really helpful to have Gail there, Gail Johnson, our public health nurse, to be able to teach people that hands-only CPR.
Correct.
Which is going to save somebody's life at some point.
Yes, it
There's
is.
no doubt.
Yes, it is.
And
Because people, they don't want to. I mean, if a person's overdose, you know, not many people are going to get down and start doing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on them. Plus, you have to be certified to do that. You know, with this new thing from the American Red Cross, that they say it's okay. Just keep the blood pressure, keep the blood pumping,
Right.
and we should be okay.
So, Ray, this position that you're in is probably going to transition soon.
Correct.
Where do you see the most focus that needs to be right now? What do we have to focus on as far as getting to people, and what are the challenges we're going to face in the future?
Well, they've finally come around, and everybody agrees there's a co-disorder with substance abuse and mental health. So I think everybody is now starting to agree that mental health and substance abuse have to be worked together. You know, so if we can somehow get a substance abuse mental health coordinator, something on that idea. And I think it would be good for the town.
All right. Ray, thank you very much for all your hard work.
Thank you.
We wish you well on your future endeavors.
I know.
Because you are leaving your position, and deservedly so. So I'd like to thank you, and thank you everybody for watching this presentation. We hope you get something out of it. We feel it was worthwhile and useful for all of our residents to even just watch.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.